Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Human Reaction. Happy Thanksgiving, belated Thanksgiving to you. We're glad to have you join us this weekend. If you're new to the show, we would love it if you would like, follow, and subscribe everywhere that you might find this podcast. On YouTube, if you're watching on YouTube, we are so close to 1,300 followers, so please do subscribe to the channel for more great content. And if you would like to get access to our exclusive members-only content, such as the Skiff Members Only show, please do go to humanreactionpod.com to find out how. Today, I am very happy to be joined from afar while I'm on vacation by my co-hosts David Rand, Kyle Mack, and Bennett on the buttons. Kyle, how you doing, man?
Doing good. And I also pulled a meme from the Discord, from Russell in the Discord. It is Bill Clinton having a nice Thanksgiving dinner saying, "No, sweetie pie, we didn't kill the turkey. He committed suicide."
Not a bad impression. Good. Well done, sir.
I was practicing earlier. You guys forced me to practice it, and it was terrible until that moment. I felt like I did okay.
You nailed it. Well done.
If you are a small business owner looking for exponential growth, you have to connect with Adam Thune at Intellectual Patriots. He will revolutionize your business game and help you get to the next level. Adam can streamline your business practices and advertising strategies to improve your bottom line. His expertise in data engineering means he can build you the systems you need to collect and analyze market data. His mission is to provide you with invaluable insights to fuel your success. From grant writing and business proposals to digital systems integrations, even AI management, Intellectual Patriots is a one-stop shop for cutting-edge solutions. Don't wait another second. Visit intelpatriots.com to learn more. That's INTEL patriots.com. This episode is brought to you by Revved Up Promo, the official apparel partner of Human Reaction. Revved Up is a premier full-service shop specializing in laser engraving, screen printing, and embroidery. Not only are they now making all of our apparel right down the road from us, they can do the same for your brand and ship it to you anywhere in the world. Revved Up helps you navigate the extensive universe of merch options and uses state-of-the-art techniques to showcase your brand in its very best light. So if you want to support our show and our generous sponsor, you can now do so by buying our merch and by turning to Revved Up Promo for your own custom apparel needs. Reach them at revveduppromo.com. That's with 2 V's and 2 P's, or just check the show notes for a link.
So Dave, I guess get us kicked off. What are we doing here?
What we're talking about today is we're diving further into Operation Chokepoint than a fatherless OnlyFans girl. God damn it. I'm so sick. I can't talk.
You, David.
There's no stream. I mean, there's no fucking buttons because we had to use the audio for the computer.
No Stream Deck?
Yeah.
Oh, sad.
I'll just say it.
So all the anti, you just gotta give us your best impression.
Oh my God, you, David.
Well, yeah. So we're going to be diving into a topic that is like very near and dear topic to me. It's one of the things that I thought was one of the most important issues that kind of went under the radar this election. Mark Andreessen was on the Joe Rogan Experience. Mark Andreessen is of A16Z, Andreessen Horowitz, one of the biggest venture capital firms in the world when it comes to tech innovation.
Original founder of Netscape, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Like that's like, and if for you young folks, Netscape was the browser before Chrome and Firefox and all that kind of stuff. That's the one you went to for the best.
I have to interject here. This is so stupid, but last night we were playing Trivial Pursuit after Thanksgiving dinner, and Mark Andreessen was one of the questions.
Nice.
And what company started after Mosaic was the question, and I knew it. Netscape Navigator, so I'm dating myself.
Nice. Yeah, well, they had a little like post-election recap. That was very, very good. One of my favorite Rogan episodes in a while, to be honest. I'm a big Mark Andreessen fan, but one of the big topics that came out of it was them talking about Operation Chokepoint. And if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, it's been something that I've brought up every now and then, but it's something that I think the average person in America doesn't know anything about. And I guess to kind of get into it, the original Operation Chokepoint was this initiative by the Obama administration back in 2013. And actually here, let me pull the wiki out.
I'd say some of the OnlyFans girls probably know about it.
See, it's a good joke. I'm telling you, if I could just deliver it right.
It was a good joke.
And it was initiative at the United States State Department, Department of Justice. And what it really did was it targeted gun manufacturers. It targeted escort services. This is kind of where a lot of states were starting to legalize prostitution. And it targeted marijuana distributors. Marijuana.
It's all about round the clock sex.
He's trying back there.
With the goal of squeezing them out of financial institutions. Like, that's the idea, is you're choking them out. So even though these industries are becoming legal, you're then squeezing them out of institutions where they can like have payroll, have direct deposit, do just basic financial servicing. And instead, all these industries have to escape towards cash because that's the only way that they can operate.
Backpage.com is one of the common things that people point to kind of demonstrate this initial Operation Chokepoint, that they were offering effectively prostitution services online. It was all done through euphemism, right? But there's lots of work. Lots of work has been done by the Reason Foundation and Reason Magazine, kind of documenting the targeting specifically of Backpage in order to do that. Now, the effect that they claim from that was all these people who were prostitutes that were doing it online relatively safely have now been pushed into the black market, where it was more dangerous and all that kind of stuff. So that's like an example of Operation Chokepoints in the prostitution area. But we saw this in like gun manufacturers and stuff like that.
Yeah. Here in Bozeman in 2014, I don't know if this would technically be classified under Operation Chokepoint, but we because it wasn't squeezing out of financial services, it was actually just FBI raids. There was a company in Bozeman called USA Brass, and I think they had like a false complaint about lead poisoning or something like that, and the EPA sent in a SWAT team into this company 10 years ago here in Bozeman. And they did like shell casings was their thing. And there was like some false complaint about lead poisoning that just all of a sudden then ended up having this midnight raid.
Right. So the Second Amendment crowd has been lit up about Operation Chokepoint for some time. But it's not really broken into the mainstream for understanding about what its implications are, what it means. So the big picture is isolating these companies because they are high stakes or like dangerously could be used by organized crime or by nefarious figures, and then basically regulating them to death or isolating them in the financial system, kicking them out of the financial system altogether. Is that right?
Yep, exactly.
So what's Operation Chokepoint 2.0?
Yeah, so let's maybe we can maybe jump over to some of the clips here from Mark Andreessen on the Joe Rogan Experience. But just to give a little precursor to it, Operation Chokepoint 2.0, it's not like an official initiative. It's something that's been coined, particularly coming out of the crypto industry, especially from a guy by the name of Nick Carter. If you're in crypto, you kind of know who he is. He's been kind of the big guy on this. And he really followed a lot of the investigations in the aftermath of the Silicon Valley Bank collapse. And you saw like the Silvergate collapse, all of this stuff, and looking at how there appeared to be almost a forced suicide that was going on with a lot of these bankruptcies coming in from the feds, essentially, in order to what seemed to be targeted strikes on the crypto industry. But then you also see all of these entities kind of on the outside is like, you'll see like crypto exchanges, they'll be working with various banks or whatever in order to be able to like secure capital and kind of put all their customer funds and stuff into. And then I experienced this with some of the crypto exchanges that I use. All of a sudden they're like, we got to switch banks. We got to switch banks, and all your funds, you have to move all your stuff in order to be able to make this happen, or else you might lose your funds because this bank's no longer going to be servicing as us. One of the crypto exchanges that I use had that happen to them a couple years ago too. I remember. So like I've seen this happen, but it's just like if you are a crypto like startup, tons of people just debanked, just completely removed from the industry because of these types of things. And it's just like fear tactics. It's not even like an official, like it's not like a written law or anything. It's just fear.
And this is all kind of downstream, right? We're not seeing the government document that says this is Operation Chokepoint 2.0.
Yeah, it's not an official thing.
These are the effects, and we're noticing a pattern on the effect end of it for employees and for companies and things like that. And that's what Mark Andreessen's getting into.
Yeah, so this first clip here is him talking about Elizabeth Warren and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and these what are called independent federal agencies that they use. And then you basically have just like a senator that's just like, this is her pet project where she can just go and target anybody that she wants, right? So here's the first clip.
Correct. Yeah, 450 federal agencies and 2 new ones a year. And then my favorite twist is we have this thing called independent federal agencies. So like, for example, we have this thing called the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, CFPB, which was it's sort of Elizabeth Warren's personal agency that she gets to control. And it's an independent agency that just gets to run and do whatever it wants, right? And if you read the Constitution, like there is no such thing as an independent agency. And yet there it is.
What does her agency do?
Whatever she wants.
What does it do, though?
Basically, it terrorize financial institutions, prevent fintech, prevent new competition, new startups that want to compete with the big banks.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
How so?
Just by terrorizing anybody who tries to do anything new in financial services. And
Can you give me an example?
Well, I guess, debanking. This is where a lot of the debanking comes from, is these agencies. So debanking is when you as either a person or your company are literally kicked out of the banking system.
Like they did to Kanye.
Exactly, like they did to Kanye. My partner Ben's father has been debanked.
Really?
We had an employee who
For what?
For having the wrong politics. for saying unacceptable things. Under current banking regulations, here's a great thing. Under current banking regulations, after all the reforms of the last 20 years, there's now a category called a politically exposed person, PEP. And if you are a PEP, you are required by financial regulators to kick them off of to kick them out of your bank. You're not allowed to have
What if you're politically on the left?
Well, that's fine.
No,
because they're not politically exposed.
So no one on the left gets debanked?
No, I have not heard of a single instance of anybody on the left getting debanked.
Can you tell me what the person that you know did? What they said that got them debanked?
Oh, well, I mean, David Horowitz is a right wing. He's pro-Trump. I mean, he said all kinds of things. He's been very anti-Islamic terrorism. He's been very worried about migration, all these things.
And they debanked him for that.
Yeah, they debanked it. So you get kicked out of your bank account. You get kicked out of you can't do credit card transactions. By the way, you can't.
How is that legal?
Well, exactly. So this is the thing, and then you go into this thing of like, well, this is where the government and the companies get intertwined. Back to your fascism point, which is there's a constitutional amendment that says the government can't restrict your speech, but there's no constitutional amendment that says the government can't debank you, right? And so if they can't do the one thing, then they do the other thing, and then they don't have to debank you. They just have to put pressure on the private company banks to do it. And then the private company banks do it because they're expected to. But the government gets to say, we didn't do it. It was the private company that did it. And of course, JP Morgan can decide who they want to have as customers, of course, right? Because they're a private company. And so it's this sleight of hand that happens. So it's basically a privatized sanctions regime that lets bureaucrats do to American citizens the same thing that we do to Iran.
Sounds kind of familiar, especially if we've done a lot of coverage on the censorship industrial complex, everything that's gone on with the social media companies. It sounds very similar to that.
Right. I looked up the PEP, the politically exposed person, on Wikipedia. It says, in financial regulation, a politically exposed person is one who has been entrusted with a prominent public function. A PEP generally presents a higher risk for potential involvement in bribery and corruption by virtue of their position and influence they may hold. Why would that be politically one way, right? If the observed effect is they're all right wing, why would that be true? Now, if you ask Bill Maher, I'm sure he'd say that's because all conservatives are, corrupted or whatever, or they're all taking Russian money or whatever. We need to get Joe in here. I feel like we're ignoring Joe. Joe, we're used to having you in the room, buddy. What are your thoughts, man?
Yeah, man. Good to be here. Well, what's interesting to me is, we talked about the censorship industrial complex and how, we have the First Amendment. He mentions we have the First Amendment for speech, but it doesn't really exist for our transactions. Mm-hmm. And we have this problem where a lot of our speech these days is facilitated by private companies. And those private companies aren't necessarily subject to, respect the First Amendment the same way that the government is. So as we're kind of grappling with the free speech issue, how does the financial issue kind of integrate into that? And should there be some kind of federal protection for individuals against private companies from doing this sort of thing? And what would that look like?
So there are free speech protections. So part of free speech legal precedent is this idea that if the government places pressure on a business for their point of view, that is chilling of speech. And there are legal precedent to establish that is the right way to interpret that. Now, that said, one of the weaknesses of the U.S. Constitution is that there is no protection for economic liberty. All of those things are kind of built on the legal basis under the Blackstone courts, but they weren't necessarily, in a lot of the English common law tradition that we inherited, they're not overtly put into the Constitution as a hard stop limit. In fact, that's one of Ayn Rand's biggest contributions is the idea of a constitutional amendment that separates government and economy very explicitly.
Well, and it's interesting because it seems like financial freedom is a component of free speech or free expression, right? I mean, you have the whole Citizens United decision saying, well, corporations should be able to give as much money as they want to a political candidate because that's them expressing their speech, their opinion.
That's
right?
not actually what Citizens United says. Citizens United says you can make a documentary about Hillary Clinton on an election year. That's what the court case was about. Citizens United is a film production company that made a documentary about Hillary Clinton that she didn't like, and then played it during when she was in the primary against Barack Obama, and then she sued them. That's how we got Citizens United.
So they kind of build that into the economic piece by saying, well, this company spent a bunch of money to produce this piece of media. Is that economic piece, the financial piece, sort of being conflated falsely by critics of that decision?
Yeah. So they're thinking so it has implications on government spending, about speech, about government officials. They said the charge from the Hillary Clinton campaign, and I might be getting the timeline wrong here. I think it was actually earlier than Barack Obama. But anyways, this is one of the earlier runs. It was about whether or not you as a private film company are engaging in electioneering by talking about candidates during an election year. Because you're making a profit on it.
Right. And I mean, obviously elections are like a very sensitive thing. In fact, I mean, yeah, you're very limited, as we've learned recently, advertising anything related to an election or a candidate or a public office on YouTube, for example. There are a lot of like parameters around what you can and can't do without proper verification. But I mean, I guess my big question is, I mean, what is the mechanism for resolving this? There's obviously a lot of just like kind of big government overreach, demanding that, you know, these people, these politically exposed persons are debanked or are restricted in some way. Like, is this something that like Trump can do in this administration to roll this stuff back executively, or is this something that has to be legislated? Like, what's the mechanism for like addressing this?
Well, Trump ended Operation Chokepoint 1.0 in 2017. That was something that he did in his administration. Like, it was an actual Trump action to do so. I think that we will end up seeing this is probably a lot of Doge work of cleaning up a lot of these independent federal agencies, because this is something where crypto people know this, but I think oftentimes the average person has a skewed view of who Elizabeth Warren actually is. She's been consistently like as bad as Gary Gensler, if not worse, in being this kind of anti-tech innovation person. And when she ran against Bernie in 2020, she was always kind of like, I'm the Bernie Sanders but a woman candidate, and I'm not controlled like by the banks like everybody else is, blah blah blah. But her entire career as a senator, and even just when she was a professor prior to being in office, was putting forward these ideas about how you can like choke people out through financial regulations in the banking sector. That's been kind of who she has been all this time. But she adopted this like framing of who she was, where she's like, I'm against the big banks, but she's been like one of the biggest people taking lobbying money from the banks and creating the kind of cartelization of the banking industry. She's been like that senator. She's been like the most engaged in that action. So I think a lot of it is people are waking up to this stuff, and also because we have Doge coming in and kind of cleaning, and probably going to be cleaning up kind of the bureaucracy around this. I think that's where we're going to see the most changes, and that's where the Trump administration is going to do a lot of good work, in my opinion, especially with just who we're seeing as the chair appointments, and we'll get into the SEC pick and things like that down the road too. But
so, and part of the function is the independence of these institutions. And he mentions this one's narrowly on finance, but there are many other independent agencies of the federal government. Now, what makes them independent is the idea that there's a limited amount of executive control from the president in them. So the Wikipedia article actually says the independent agencies are agencies that exist outside the federal executive departments, those headed by a cabinet secretary, and the executive office of the president. In a narrow sense, the term refers only to those independent agencies that, while considered part of the executive branch, have regulatory or rule-making authority and are insulated from presidential control, usually because the president's power to dismiss the agency head or a member is limited. Now, that's the interesting part where DOJ comes in and to what degree they're going to have a power to look into these. But these are broad. This is everything from Amtrak to the CIA to the EPA. There are lots of agencies here that you can dive into, all the way to the Peace Corps and Small Business Administration.
You know what's kind of funny? The CFPB here too, the one that Mark's getting at with Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren was the original person to propose it while she was a law professor in 2007. Wow. And then it was authorized by Dodd-Frank. And now she's like the leader of this independent agency.
Yikes.
Right?
Dodd-Frank was awful. Dodd-Frank is exactly, and people who don't know, Dodd-Frank is the Obama era response to the 2007-2008 financial crisis, where basically what they do is they make bailouts automatic, right? So you don't need congressional approval. You don't
too big to fail.
Yeah, too big to fail. They actually, while claiming publicly that too big to fail was bad and terrible, they enshrine it into law that the president can just bail out whenever there's systemic risk by some arbitrary measurement of their decision. And then on top of that, they cartelize the rest of the banking industry into even more so by basically separating medium, small, and large banks. And so that all the medium and smalls, they get in trouble. There's like nothing there. They face capitalism, but the large banks, they all get socialism, right?
And you need like 10,000 compliance lawyers in order to build your bank. Like since Dodd-Frank, we have no new banks that have formed.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
That's crazy. So and all it does is it just kind of continues to insulate and make it so that there's like only 3 real players that can exist. And if you're a small bank or if you're trying to start a bank, it's impossible. Like getting venture funds, like good luck.
Yeah.
Right.
So just like the Patriot Act had nothing to do with patriotism, Dodd-Frank has nothing to do with actually keeping another 2008 financial crisis happen again. In fact, it guarantees it.
Well, and let's go in because now we're going to get into the explanation of some of the stuff that's been happening with tech founders, with the kind of new rise again of Operation Chokepoint 2.0 during the Biden administration.
Whoa!
Just kick you out of the financial system, and so this has been happening to all the crypto entrepreneurs in the last 4 years. This has been happening to a lot of the fintech entrepreneurs, anybody trying to start any kind of new banking service, because they're trying to protect the big banks. And then this has been happening, by the way, also in legal fields of economic activity that they don't like. And so a lot of this started about 15 years ago with this thing called Operation Chokepoint, where they decided to, as marijuana started to become legal, as prostitution started to become legal, and then guns, which there's always a fight about. Under the Obama administration, they started to debank legal marijuana businesses, escort businesses, and then gun shops, just like your gun manufacturers, and just like you're done, you're out of the banking system. And so if you're running a medical marijuana dispensary in 2012, like you, guess what? You're doing your business all in cash because you literally can't get a bank account. You can't get a Visa terminal. You can't process transactions. You can't do payroll. You can't do direct deposit. You can't get insurance. Like none of that stuff you've been sanctioned, right? None of that stuff is available. And then this administration extended that concept to apply it to tech founders, crypto founders, and then just generally political opponents. So, yeah, so that's been like super pernicious.
I wasn't aware of that.
Oh, 100%. And this is called, so it was Operation Chokepoint 1.0 was 15 years ago against the pot and the guns. Chokepoint 2.0 is primarily against their political enemies and then to their disfavored tech startups. And it's hit the tech world like we've had like 30 founders debanked in the last 4 years.
Really?
Yeah. It's been a big recurring pattern.
30.
This is one of the reasons why we ended up supporting Trump. It's like we can't live in this world. We can't live in a world where somebody starts a company that's a completely legal thing and then they literally like get sanctioned, right, and embargoed by the United States government through a completely unaccountable, no due process. None of this is written down. There's no rules. There's no court. There's no decision process. There's no appeal. Who do you appeal to, right? Like who do you go to get your bank account back, right? God. And then there's also the civil asset forfeiture side of it, which is right the other side, and that doesn't happen to us, but that happens to people in a lot of places now who get arrested, and all of a sudden, the state takes their money.
Yes, that happens to people if they get pulled over and they have a large amount of cash in some states.
Right. Or, there've been, there's well publicized examples of there was there'll be some investigation into safe deposit boxes. And the next thing you know, the feds have seized all the contents of the safe deposit boxes, and that stuff never gets returned. And so it's this, and this is when Trump says the deep state, the way we would describe it is it's administrative power. It's political power being administered not through legislation, right? So there's no defined law that covers this. It's not through regulation. Right, there's nothing you can't go sue a regulator to fix this. It's not through any kind of court judgment. It's just raw power. It's just raw administrative power. It's the government or politicians just deciding that things are going to be a certain way, and then they just apply pressure until they get it.
So what happened?
And important there, that last step, through a private actor. And that's where the parallels to the censorship industrial complex are so compelling, right? Because the appearance from the outside, if you're not careful about how you're thinking about it, it appears to be JP Morgan or the financial institution just deciding not to do business with some individual because they're risky, because they have a risk to their business. And it's the same as like an advertiser doesn't want to do business on X anymore because there are bad guys, Nazis on the platform that are going to say bad things next to their advertising. It's as weak an argument as that.
Well, and also, let's look at, an area that I think most people are aware of was the Canadian trucker movement, right? Where we saw what happened in Canada was going against COVID regulations during the time a few years ago. What was this, 2022, I think? You had a bunch of truckers kind of holding up traffic and making it and doing a protest. And what happened was a bunch of them got debanked they couldn't, you can't use the Royal Bank of Canada anymore. And then you also had them blacklisting crypto donations to people so that people couldn't offload the crypto donations.
Didn't they steal a bunch of donations too at one point?
At exchanges, they went to exchanges that operate in Canada and stole the money from them. Civil asset forfeiture, right?
Was it like a GoFundMe too, like regular money?
GoFundMe was shut down the donations towards these protests,
right,
so people had to do alternative funding. Yeah, no reimbursements, right?
Whew. Could you imagine if you gave them like $200 and then they just stole your money and then just said, "Well, you gave it to the wrong group."
Well, and this also becomes a thing too. Then down the road, it starts being enshrined into the system of you have all these people who aren't being responsible because they're a negative to society, and so obviously they're not good parents. So now we have to go check in on their kids, right? These things have the downstream effects that come out from it, right. And it's all because we don't like Trudeau's government and what they've done with COVID regulations and the lockdowns. Right.
Let's pass it to Joe. Joe, got thoughts?
Yeah. Well, I'm curious. So, what are your guys' thoughts on the fact that we've talked a lot about Doge and what it's maybe going to be able to do, but it's not an actual real department, within the executive branch, sort of this extra thing that won't have a lot of actual power, just recommends things. And there are questions around how effective they'll be able to be, but only really because I think a lot of these issues, these departments that they might be cutting from will have a lot of pushback. Do you foresee that there will be a lot of pushback from the public specifically, or maybe from the banking sector, I would imagine, on rolling back the CFPB and sort of preventing people from being debanked for just being an unfavored person in the financial world?
That's a good question. It really depends on the execution gap between the Office of Personnel Management and Budget and what they're going to recommend and how the execution there happens, right? Because if you cut the budget of this independent agency and say you're going to cut your budget by 5% or 10%, we recommend these areas of cut. The Office of Personnel Management and Budget, they're the ones who actually say and move the dollars around. So they just receive less money. They have to do something at that point, right? Otherwise the checks don't clear. So in theory, if executed on that level, they should be able to get the cuts that they want if the execution on that level happens, right? And I don't see a reason why it shouldn't. Most of that agency, as I understand it, are accountants. They're not political actors to the same degree that the EPA or I keep forgetting what this is called. What's this agency called again? that they're talking about?
CFPB.
Consumer Financial Protection Bureau.
Yeah, that one. that where it makes sense for those people to be anti-crypto or to be more consumer protection orientated, and therefore more likely to undermine any particular reform.
But it's not consumer protection for Kyle to be debanked for whatever reason. You know, I don't know what it was that they flagged you for exactly. But I'm curious, Kyle, like, did you
Venmo,
experience
like that,
civil
right?
asset forfeiture in your experience?
No, I didn't. I had a temporary banking freeze that happened when I got kind of banned from everything. But my primary problems were mostly kind of the tech, social media, and then like PayPal, Venmo. Which I didn't really have any real money in PayPal, Venmo, so I don't really know what the result would have been there. I never did see that money back, but I had like $50 there, so it wasn't a big deal.
So technically, they did seize your assets.
Yeah. And there's kind of like a weird ostrich.
Today, Junior.
Well, I can't say that word.
I know words.
Ostracization.
I know words.
That
I have
happens
the best
there
words.
because it's kind of hard to exist without like Venmo being like a guy in your 20s. It's kind of like a weird thing where, and I'm not going back because I could this could happen at any point. Like, why would I go back? So
Relax, Kamala.
I just ended up. We're not going back, Bennett.
Don't let them steal your power, Kyle.
Well, because like to me, it's just it's never been more obvious. Just move to crypto.
Yeah.
Like it's the safest place I can be. I can actually be my own bank, and I can do borrowing and lending there. Like why have my money in these institutions? That seems like ridiculous to me. It seems like functionally idiotic to do that.
Part of the sale of crypto for a very long time was the censorship proofness of it, right? That there's no central actor to attack other than the exchanges, right?
Blacklisting wallets on exchanges and things like that. That's the primary attack vector.
The other part of that is, and I want to note the differences between a private company keeping your assets, which is illegal, and civil asset forfeiture, which is the government keeping your assets because you're part of an investigation. Now, what happens with that is they basically, seize your assets and then don't give it back even after the investigation's over and you're cleared of any crime. But there are processes usually to get it back in that circumstance, depending on the state. The federal government isn't supposed to do civil asset forfeiture. They're not supposed to have that capability, but they do it all the time because it's kind of federalized, this practice. And it's just the Byzantine nature of getting the money back that actually prohibits most people from being able to get their assets returned to them.
Yeah, so something I want to highlight here is Brian Armstrong had a tweet. This is actually from an article that's talking about this whole situation with Mark Andreessen. It's talking about the 30 founders that got debanked, and this is from Cointelegraph, but they highlighted a tweet from Brian Armstrong, who is the CEO of Coinbase, who has been actually... Coinbase has been exceptionally good at this last election cycle. They put a whole foundation together, and they put like scorecards on candidates on how good they are on crypto and things like Operation Chokepoint. Like they've been very good at highlighting these issues. And a major part of the crypto lobbying front, which this is the first real election where that's been a thing that's existed, and the crypto actually had a major had a lot of power in this election when it comes to the voting. It says, can confirm that this is true. He's talking about the debanking situation. It was one of the most unethical and un-American things that happened in the Biden administration, and my guess is we'll find Elizabeth Warren's fingerprints all over it. Biden himself was probably unaware.
That's surprising.
Sleepy Joe. We're still collecting documents via FOIA requests, so hopefully the full story emerges of who was involved and whether they broke any laws. Warren and Gensler tried to unlawfully kill our industry, and it was a major factor in the Dems losing the election. The Democratic Party should realize Warren is a liability and further distance themselves if they want to have any hope of rebuilding.
And this is another example of what we talked about a couple of weeks ago with the falling apart of the Obama era, right? The Obama era of Democrat Party was made of tech and finance. And now you have tech and finance turning on them because of, the populist left, but actually pro-corporate America leftism, basically betraying those folks and them removing their support. Kind of suggests that democracy still works a little bit. Right. I mean, if you don't appease that interest group to some degree, they're going to hold you accountable over some period of time, and seems to have done so in this case.
One area, and I don't think I'm going to play the clip for this, but one other area to highlight on how the Operation Chokepoint 2.0 stuff happens is Mark Andreessen goes on to talk about how there's this Eye of Sauron effect, and how when the eye comes in down on you, all of a sudden you're just like, oh, I don't know what to do, and I'm panicking, and I'll comply with anything because like, oh, the empire is coming down on me in this moment. And there's this nature of there being no fingerprints because it's not an actual law or like a declared operation that's actually going on. There's like this weird, ambiguous bureaucratic nightmare that happens. And the SEC has this threat that they use on tech startups, particularly crypto. The SEC is the Security Exchange Commission. There's a lot of debate on which federal agency should actually be the one to regulate this industry. But as of right now, pretty much everything except for Bitcoin is regulated under the SEC as securities. And what the SEC will do is they will go to some project and they will offer a Wells notice. And all the Wells notice is it's not like a thing where it's like, hey, we are taking action against you. It's just like, hey, just be alert. We're watching you.
Mm. And so,
we may or may not take action in the future.
Right. So, and just to be clear, Kyle, or Joe, the Eye of Sauron is from Lord of the Rings. He's a bad guy.
God.
Yeah.
Joe does know Lord of the Rings.
Okay.
I can confirm that one.
Thank you. Bennett and I have shared many Lord of the Rings memes, so he's got my back on this.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, and
So
it's
you can
purely
see-
just like you might be in violation of securities laws. Maybe we don't know, but like we just think that you might be. So, hey, here's a letter, and they'll just do that.
We're gonna do
to
something.
companies.
It's definitely obviously a threat,
Oh yeah,
right? And
it's
so
mafia. It's like a mafia shakedown, right?
any reasonable person would see it as a threat. Oh man, the Wikipedia reads very Orwellian sounding. It's pretty
I
wild.
haven't looked at the Wikipedia. Let me pull that up if there's something that you want to highlight there.
Well, it's just a Wells notice is a letter that the U.S. Security Exchange Commission sends to people or firms at the conclusion of an SEC investigation that states the SEC is planning to bring an enforcement action against them. The notice informs the people of the firm in the question that the SEC has concluded that they should be charged with a violation of securities laws. The notice indicates that the SEC staff has determined it may bring civil action against a person or firm. So wait, civil action? That's not criminal action. If it's violating SEC law, wouldn't it be criminal? Like, isn't it a crime to? I don't know. I'm confused. To break the law. So usually civil actions are things that aren't in executive code that you've broken a civil law, which is a very different set of standards and experience for bringing prosecution. The person firm is generally given 30 days to file this response in the form of a legal brief considering factual and legal and factual arguments as to why no charges should be brought against them. So it's like you get this chance 30 days later. It's like, wait, we haven't broken the law. Like, what is going on here?
It's your duty to show us that you haven't broken the law.
What's going on?
Otherwise, we're going to bring lawsuit. And this is something that's happened time and time again over the last few years, especially during the Biden administration, is the SEC will just file these frivolous lawsuits on companies, and then the companies have to put all of this work in order to say, like, no, we're completely clean. We're in, like, we're following the laws. We're the SEC guidance, which is not even there. Like, this is what we're doing. Right. And then the SEC loses these lawsuits time and time again. One of the biggest ones was the Ripple lawsuit, which just went on for years and years and years. And it was one of those things where if Ripple's not if Ripple isn't violating the securities laws, it was just kind of like nobody is really. It was kind of like that type of a case,
kind of a watershed case.
Yeah. But like, so the SEC will just continually be filing these, and it's just like, it's your duty to defend yourself against us. And then that's kind of the recognition, like, okay, yeah, you are a company that's doing okay. It's like, or maybe we should operate in a system where it's like, maybe you should actually bring something forward, SEC, instead of just bogging down all of these fledgling companies in order to be able to operate in the country.
Right. In a sense, it actually. Oh, go ahead, Joe.
There's something interesting here that the Wells notice says the SEC will bring civil action. Mark Andreessen has noted that these are perfectly legal companies operating legally for all the founders that have been debanked, right? And if the SEC is constantly losing these lawsuits? Is it because there's actually no law that's been broken and they're just kind of trying to say you're violating our, private banking monopoly and we don't like what you're doing, so we're going to sue you to try to stop you and just bog you down in court and get you to go away? Is that what's going on here?
That's exactly what it seems like, right?
And it also like discourages traditional financial institutions to invest in these areas. It keeps money out of that system so that they can't grow. It prevents, like our friend of the show was making the point that it prevents a lot of this from actually going into investing in new ideas and programs, right? Because everything is held up at this regulatory layer. Kurt was making this point.
Yeah.
And therefore, there's less investment in actual software programming in crypto, slowing down the industry's ability to disrupt.
There's also an area too, and I didn't bring the AI stuff into the notes, but Mark had said that in the spring earlier this year, he went and met with the Biden administration, not Biden himself, because Biden doesn't talk to people, but he went and met with the Biden administration and was like, and they were talking about AI, because this is like, AI is really starting to bubble up in the spring of this year.
It's a fancy thing.
And it's a fancy thing. It's 2 letters. And the Biden administration basically said, you shouldn't bother putting any money into AI because it's just not going to happen here.
Wow.
And the entire threat was like, unless the government's controlling it, it's just not going to happen. And Joe then goes on to ask Mark, well, what do you do after that meeting? He's like, well, you endorse Trump.
Right.
It's that simple.
Right.
And A16Z went and endorsed Trump.
Yeah. And you go and you buy and you invest in Taiwanese firms and, South Korean firms and Japan's, efforts in AI. You don't invest here in America, which is really where the big, shift is, at least especially for the Trump people, because they're like, either we grow it here or grow someplace else. So how do we take advantage of it?
It really highlights like this failure of the Democrats to notice that you can only for so long sort of like threaten and sort of like blockade your constituents' ability to start businesses and run businesses effectively and expect them to continue voting for you. Probably something we should add to the long list from our previous episode about why the Democrats lost here. Obviously, Mark mentions it directly. How can you expect your constituents to continue to vote for you when you're just like stepping in their way at every turn?
Well, and that was the big thing is like we highlighted, I brought forward the Trump speaking at the Bitcoin conference, RFK speaking at the Bitcoin conference, all of these people in this new tent that has formed. It's not necessarily even just like a Republican Democrat thing, like this new political realignment. There was always this big thing where the crypto people, I would say like 90% of the crypto industry has fallen into that tent, and they were extremely supportive of Trump. There's a handful of people that are still kind of these like Silicon Valley lefty types that were actively, as seems to be coming out now, actively working with like the CFTC and the SEC and journalists to try and expose people. And I highlighted that with the Polymarket raid that happened because the feds came in and raided Copeland's house, not even the office, not the Polymarket office. It's the CEO's house.
Wow. He was a PEP. He's a person of exposed. He's a politically exposed person.
Yeah. So like you have that dynamic that's happening too, but it seems to be kind of the dying breaths of whatever these institutions are right now. And like I know people personally that are overseas and they will not come back to the United States, like travel back to the United States until Trump is back in office. Because they're just worried that the Eye of Sauron is going to crack down on them.
One additional part of the Eye of Sauron thought in the kind of threat that is the Wells Notice is how it results in other kind of cultural pressures. For example, like DEI, ESG investment and stuff like that. If you know the system is pushing a direction and you're swimming upstream from that and you get that initial sense that the Eye of Sauron is on you, what do you do to try to appease them? Maybe you invest in DEI.
Look at all these diversity hires I have.
Yeah, right. I'm a good company. Look at all the diversity hires. Yeah, exactly. And then you can cast yourself as the good guy in the cultural milieu that these people care about, at least that the regulators and enforcers care about.
Exactly.
And the big financiers, right?
Let's move on here to the. You had put something in here, David. The Treasury War Internationally.
Yeah. So he kind of suggests it, but I do want to kind of connect some dots here that I think are important. is the Department, and I'm just reminding you, this is from episode 93 that we covered about the Treasury Department specifically taking action against Sputnik. So this is when the crackdown on Russian influence was happening. What was it, September or October?
Yeah.
I should have written that down. But where our good friend of the show, Ethan Holmes, and many other people at Sputnik lost their jobs because they were designated as a foreign mission by the Treasury at that time. So if you notice that this came out with prosecution of other state, like the State Department took an action, the Treasury took an action, and other government agencies all took independent action at the same time against Sputnik, which was like a news service similar to like AP, specifically to get American news, both to the world through this mechanism, right? So what I want to note is that this, I think, is way broader than people think. And maybe to integrate this with your overall vision of U.S. statecraft is kind of vision like this. Like you have the State Department, which is like your diplomacy layer, right? Mm-hmm. So we send our State Department assets, whether it's a diplomat or whatever, to a country and says, hey, do better with your human rights abuses, or hey, don't do that thing with the rainforest or whatever. Or treat this other country better in this way, or treat them worse in this way, in that there's that level of diplomacy. Then you have like the overt ops level, which is we're going to invade this country, we're going to pass new sanction regimes or whatever on energy or something like that. That level of the overt ops of the U.S. State Department and the Department of Defense. And then you have the Treasury level. And this Treasury level requires no authorization for Congress to conduct isolation efforts to basically turn people out of the financial system globally. And they do this on the company level, right? Like they did with Sputnik in this case in America. But on the international level, it's with way less fanfare. And they can do it much more systemically. Remember I think it was last year, I did the whole Biden is a pirate thing.
Yeah.
How there's this whole like regime effort to control oil shipments overseas that sometimes include literally taking oil tankers and diverting them to other ports than they were meant to go to in order to steal the oil, right? Well, this is the same kind of invisible arm of the government operating internationally, pushing some companies out, keeping some companies in strategically in the effort for U.S. statecraft. So think of the Treasury not as simply cutting checks and managing international finance or domestic finance. Imagine them as a tool of statecraft internationally and domestically. And then you have the parallel with the censorship industrial complex. It becomes even more clear, where you have this layer of government influence on private industry in the shaping of the efforts of the State Department's goals that will then present itself as basically an invisible war, right? Where there's no fingerprints on anything. There's no tracing of it, because what you see is just the private banks of U.S. and Europe refusing to do business with this Middle Eastern or Eastern European industry, or operating alongside the CIA, such as we know that they were doing, or less we am theorizing, that they were doing in Burisma to nationalize Burisma and control it into UK finance. Each one of those is in cooperation between the covert ops of the CIA and the overt ops of the Treasury Department and the banks that they regulate. Does that make sense? So then you're starting to get a picture, the larger picture of how much of an empire operates across these different layers in order for its ultimate goal, which is U.S. global domination, hegemony.
An added thing to this on the statecraft side is I kind of forgot to I didn't put this in the notes because I kind of glossed over it this week, was that about a year ago, the developer of Tornado Cash, which is a coin mixer, which essentially it uses smart contracts to provide kind of anonymity to your crypto, where it puts a bunch of coins together and then mixes them up, and then you can move them to different wallets, so you can kind of like scramble your coins and hide your footprint. The developer of that protocol was arrested about a year or two ago in Europe, and he actually just got out. It was just ruled that he's completely fine and software is free speech, et cetera, blah, 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 all this stuff, which is a very good thing. Because one of the things that he got hit for was, one, it's a decentralized protocol. He has no actual control over it anymore. It's run by a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization, which is kind of a governing mechanism that keeps it so that one person can't control everything on it. And he got hit with, well, North Koreans use it. North Korean hackers use it. And so if you touched it, your wallets will be blacklisted and exchanges will be in violation if they interact with wallets that have been touched by it, all this stuff. And so it got secured. So he went to jail, but he actually just, my understanding is he just got freed. So this kind of another kind of one of these things where, there's these protocols that exist. The founders don't have control over them anymore because it's just software. It's just protocols. It's using zero knowledge proofs and smart contracts now. And he can't like open it up or anything or stop people from using it. He can't do that. But the governments are like, bad actors can use it, therefore you're bad. You created a software program, you are bad. Wow. Right? And there's stamps them out.
It's the exact phenomenon that roped up Ross Ulbricht as well, right? I mean, the founder of the Silk Road. Bad actors can use this platform. You're a bad person. However, I mean, obviously he did create it. It wasn't a DAO in that case, so he is sort of like personally implicated in that. But it's sort of the precedent, right? Of like, oh, if you create a tool that just might happen to be used by entities that we don't like, we're going to punish you for that.
Yeah. Imagine running a bakery and just like some mafia boss came in and bought a donut one time.
How dare you sell a donut to
like what you're supposed to do
to the mafia don?
What are you supposed to do? And that's there's this phenomena, and we saw this during COVID a lot, of the government exporting its actual duty to do its job, the costs of enforcement for the government onto private businesses. So it's not up to the government to buy you those stupid little lines so that you know where to sign. You have to pay for all that. You have to vet all your employees to make sure that they've been vaccinated. All these things get exported to the private sector to enforce what the government wants, and they just rule things by that dictatorial fiat. And you're supposed to police who your customers are just in case the wrong type happen to. And it's like it's the government's boss to stop the mafia don from being in public, right? If a bad person's doing it, it's not your job as the bakery
This is the
owner.
thing. Like, this is the thing is, technically, these centralized institutions, like centralized exchanges, they can kind of police it. It's hard, but they can police it. These decentralized protocols, you can't police it. Anybody can just go and interact with it.
Right.
As long as you have the URL and you can just connect an EV wallet into it, like, anybody can use it. There's no stopping anybody from using the protocol. It is impossible. It is designed that way.
Yeah, right. Crazy. So how's this all going to stop? Well, maybe a new Treasury Secretary.
SEC chair.
SEC chair will make the difference. So we got a new appointment this week on SEC chair.
I announced, I said that Gary Gensler a few weeks ago kind of put out this, like, here's my awesome time at the SEC. And it's kind of like this, he's alluding to stepping down, but officially he is now stepping down. He says on January 20th, 2025, I will be stepping down as SEC chair. And Elon Musk tweeted under it, is it true that the SEC only works one day a month in the office? So he's putting out this threat for Doge is coming for you.
Nice.
But yeah, Trump has nominated a guy by the name of Paul Atkins, who's a former SEC commissioner. And everything that I've seen so far, pretty good philosophically. He's a very pro-growth, pro-innovation. He's very much like investor accreditation, because there's like very strict investor accreditation rules that exist for participating in the markets as a normal person.
Yep.
He's very much against that. He's very much like free market type of guy of like anybody should be able to kind of come into financial institutions and play around, knowing their risk.
Treating adults like adults. Yeah, right. like recognizing that if you invest in something, that doesn't mean it's your money. It's not a bank. It's an investment, so it might not work out. that whole and we'll have a really great Kibbe on Liberty clip that we're not going to play this time, but definitely check it out. He was interviewed by Matt Kibbe on his podcast, and it's really excellent. He had a really great statement of his philosophy, basically saying we need to disrupt this because this is what provides consumers with value, is when you jump in the middle, cut out the middleman, and allow people to control their money and invest their money directly. That's a good thing for consumers, and that's what the SEC should be about, because it's about protecting consumers and empowering consumers, and that's one of the best benefits of crypto and these disruptive fintech firms is they themselves cut out the middleman and allow consumers to take the risk, but also take the rewards more directly.
Yeah, and there's also some movements here too that are happening in the area. So, as I've mentioned before, the SEC has been one of the biggest pains, one of the pains for the industry. But it appears that the Trump administration is wanting to move crypto regulation to be much more oversight under the CFTC rather than the SEC. And currently, Bitcoin is largely regulated by the CFTC. And this would be putting it more as a commodity that exists rather than the current security infrastructure where everything at the SEC right now is governed by, does it fit the Howey test, which is this ancient archaic law from 100 years ago.
We've talked about that before, haven't we? Yeah. But keep going.
Well, but it's this archaic law that just doesn't really apply anymore to the current infrastructure of like these new technologies. Like we have a whole new asset class. It doesn't it should be treated as a new asset class, moving it towards being commodity based for most things. Cause I could see an argument for some crypto projects to be considered securities, and then being kind of governed in the same way that, like stocks would be, public stocks. But for the most part, a lot of these, especially if it's decentralized, there's no controlling entity. There's no one that you're like, that's the person that like we're not sitting there being like, yeah, if Satoshi does something, then Bitcoin's good. Everything has to be that's kind of what the securities framework says is like. And Ethereum, for instance, we're not really looking at the Ethereum, there's not some central entity that we're looking at as we're expecting returns because this very specific entity says that it's going to, and they're trying to boost the ROI of the company and all this stuff, right?
Right.
So a lot of these things can be moved into a different framework of how we look at taxes. And with that being said, as these move in there, what we're probably going to end up seeing is much different tax structure.
Help me with that, because what isn't clear to me is whether it's a security or a commodity, you still have to pay capital gains tax. If you buy gold and it appreciates in value, when you sell it, that difference in value from when you bought it to when you sold it, that's capital gains. Now, unless there's some action by Congress to say Bitcoin is not a commodity that's subject to capital gains tax, I don't see how that changes. What are you thinking there?
Trump has verbally himself stated that he would like to see Bitcoin not be the trading of Bitcoin to not be a taxable event. So imagine that buying and selling things with it.
He has the opportunity too. When they renew the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, that will require a new bill that re-ups and pushes out the date of extension or eliminates the extension for the tax cuts. When he's doing that, that's the perfect opportunity to add into there. Also, cryptocurrency or Bitcoin is not a commodity subject to capital gains tax.
Yeah, that would be.
Could you imagine
incredible for the industry? Incredible.
That would be huge.
The amount of innovation.
Does that fact that if say were to do that, would that change the regulatory framework? Like who would be regulating it? CFTC, SEC, or would the CFTC really have any meaningful oversight if it weren't for the fact that you were being taxed on it? How does that work?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly what happens right now. And the some of the best things is that of the new administration coming in is what we're probably going to see is we'll actually know the rules. Because up until this point, the rules have been incredibly unclear for everybody involved, and that's one of the biggest things where you're getting these Wells notices coming in from the SEC, and you're kind of Brian Armstrong said this a long time ago. I think it was on the All In podcast. He went on there and saying we don't actually know what the rules are that we're supposed to be complying with. Mm-hmm. They're just coming in and trying to sue us, and we don't know, they're not giving us any framework. And I've been trying to take calls with Gary Gensler, and he won't let me come into the office so that we can actually talk about it. Like that
Yeah.
was the state of the industry for throughout this administration, is like, we just don't know. Like, and now we're getting like actual crypto bills and regulations, largely thanks to people like Cynthia Loomis out of Wyoming, great senator out of Wyoming. And it's like, here, we can actually like tell you what the rules are.
Well, and it's interesting too. It looks like Paul Atkins, this SEC chair appointee, was added to the Chamber of Digital Commerce's advisory board in 2020, which is the world's first and largest blockchain trade association, which should bode well for his friendliness, particularly in contrast to Gary Gensler towards the broader crypto and blockchain industry.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of it too is the unfortunate nature of Gary Gensler, as Gary Gensler got put in, and the industry actually thought that he was going to be pretty good because he taught blockchain classes at MIT beforehand. And then he goes in and everything changed. He was a friendly guy towards the industry. It appeared that he was a friendly guy, and then it was just like something happened. It was like maybe he went in the skiff with Mike Johnson. I don't know.
Say
He
that.
got skiffed. He got skiffed. One additional, the counter pressure there is the revenue from cryptocurrency, and I haven't been able to find how much revenue the federal government gets out of capital gains tax on cryptocurrency explicitly. ChatGPT let me down on that one. Probably ought to move to Grok. So but that's the counter pressure, right? Is how much, and that's always been the argument for having crypto be taxed, is because it gives the government like a reason to not want to stop crypto altogether, because it's not a pure competition to the dollar. Then it's actually a revenue source, and the government's more likely to see it as an asset for regular people to hold it. That said, it's not a necessary way to approach this, right? That was maybe the right call at one point. Now the call is, how can we reduce these taxes so we can encourage innovation in this area so that we can disrupt these things? And additionally to that, what we haven't cited is why it's a public good to be able to get your money out of dollars and into Bitcoin or into other currencies, is because what it does is it places a check on the Federal Reserve for their actions, right? So you can escape the dollar and inflationary pressures into things like gold, but you're going to pay capital gains. But if you can put it into cryptocurrency, you're going to have a much more, I think, smoother check against inflation as more people do that in order to escape, low interest rates or high interest rates or whatever you're looking at. Additionally, that what we see in cryptocurrency is what we should have seen all along in dollar. Remember how it got weird when interest rates went up? People were like, hey, did you know that you could put your money in a savings account and it earns interest? That's what savings accounts are supposed to do, right?
I've never lived in that world.
But we've had low interest rates for such a long time, near zero interest rates for such a long time, that was impossible. But at the same time, that was doable on Cardano and other kind of cryptocurrency blockchains, where you could stake, you could put money in, stake that, it would then run the blockchain off of that, and then you would get a return for your investment and for your, basically like a savings account.
Everything, like with Ethereum, you stake in Lido. With Cardano, you stake it. With Atom, you stake it. Like all of these things, you're getting an APY based off of the basically off like the minting schedule. Every chain has its own minting schedule, and it's the equivalent of mining. It's just proof of stake models. But also in DeFi, decentralized finance, you can do borrowing and lending. You can lend out your money and get an APY on it, and you can make like 5% on your stuff. You can give out loans, like you can loan out your NFTs. I could loan out my Penguin if I wanted to and get APY on that. It's like an entirely different. There's entire economies that are going on right now underneath people's noses that people don't even realize they're happening right now. And so many people are finding financial freedom because of that. And they've completely exited the banking systems. I really mean it. Like right now, with the exception of just like paying bills, like very basic bills, like to my HOA, there's literally no reason for me to have a bank account anymore. I just don't see it. That being said, I don't have like a boss where I'm getting direct deposits from a company or anything like that. So like that's the area where people are still confined, really. Right. But if we move into this world over the next 4 years where there's just all this friendliness to the industry, what we're probably going to finally end up seeing is you can choose, like, you're going to give your payments. It's like you can choose to use your credit card from your bank, or you can choose to use a Bitcoin wallet or whatever. And it'll start to be more and more integrated into things just naturally.
Kyle, do you find that are you able to spend crypto on daily purchases, groceries,
Right
whatever,
now,
just daily goods?
what I do is I have a crypto debit card where I move crypto into fiat on a debit card that I use with an exchange. That is my primary thing that I do, and I usually just move over my staking rewards from whatever thing, and that becomes my day-to-day expenses, right?
Well, and one of the benefits of reducing the taxes, and now makes commerce with it more doable, right? Because then I got this much crypto in at this price because someone bought a sandwich becomes less of a huge financial accounting burden.
Yeah. Because right now it's still everything's in fiat. Everything, like, although that being said, is a lot of the point of sale outlets that a lot of major retailers use now have introduced things like the Lightning Network into them. It's just a matter of, like, once those get implemented, and we might start to see that move. Like, it seems like the banks and the point of sale processing that a lot of retailers use, they're all making the moves for this to happen. And I think there's a lot of, well, the current administration is not friendly towards it, so we're not going to do anything with it yet. But once we move into a new era, which seems to be where we're going with the Trump administration, that's probably where all this stuff starts to be integrated. Because it's also, a lot of people are a little, like, they're always concerned. It's like, oh, we're moving on to a new system, but, like, credit cards were the same way. People were very resistant to credit cards back in the day, and now we're just offering more. There'll be more rails, because right now we're using, like, Visa's payment rails, all right. And now it's just like you'll be able to use Visa, or you'll be able to use, like, some layer 2 Ethereum, or, like, you'll be able to use Bitcoin or whatever. It'll be, and I think people will just kind of, and I think a lot of that will be abstracted too, because right now it's really hard for people to conceptualize that because everything's still very technical, but a lot of that is becoming abstracted, and there are projects that I'm invested in. I won't sell my bags, but there are projects that are working towards that.
I mean, like Cash App has Bitcoin built into it, right?
Exactly.
And you could use it as Venmo, or you could use it as a Bitcoin wallet, and then you can also use it for points and rewards at various different point of sale systems. So there's all kinds of opportunities for there. But the major barrier is the regulatory escape. If you're gonna get all your stuff used against you with the IRS auditing your business or something like that, if you didn't handle it right. So where we can create regulatory certainty and where you can reduce the tax liability, now you're in a situation where there's no incentive not to, other than just the technical barriers, which is where we've been stalled out for 10 years now, 12 years now, on that sense.
Yeah.
Let's maybe close out the show with just a little bit of a side note.
But also relevant, new appointee.
But part of so the SEC chair, we got a new appointee, but it would be a mistake not to mention this new appointee at the NIH.
Yes,
which is Jay Bhattacharya.
There you go.
Right? That's his name, right?
Yeah. New head of NIH, and Trump had, tweeted this out, put this out, and it was hosted by RFK Jr. Also put out the statement on it. And it's really exciting, right? Bhattacharya is the guy. He's a signee on the Barrington Declaration. He's one of the major COVID warriors, basically saying, hey, we don't, and this is what the Barrington Declaration said, just to remind you, is we need to protect old people. We don't need to lock down the entire economy. Basically articulating the Sweden model, the model that we used for 100 years before China and George Bush came along and said, hey, we should instead do everything like socialism. We'll do things like regular people do, use property rights and protect the vulnerable. And major COVID hero, he was out there articulating things, and he wrote the foreword to Tom's book's Diary of a Psychosis,
which was a full documentation on the COVID hysteria.
A great book too. I've got a lot of the summaries on it. I need to actually sit down and read it one of these days. But yeah, super exciting.
Yeah,
I can't say how thrilling this pick is, honestly. I mean, this guy was absolutely, he was pilloried in the media for his opposition to the COVID lockdowns. And the fact that he can go from basically being completely ostracized by the medical establishment to heading up the NIH is like just the most poetic justice I could possibly imagine on this topic.
Yeah,
and I
taking
want to
Fauci's old job. It's crazy.
Yeah, man, it's just so freaking satisfying for those of us that feel so wronged for what happened. And I know there are a ton of us that do. And I want to speak a little bit, I think, to the ongoing sort of libertarian infighting that's going on right now, mostly on X.
God damn,
that we're not going to get super far into it, but there are a lot of libertarians that feel really like let down by the contingent of the LP that supported Trump, believed in his promises to put a libertarian in the cabinet and, kind of do different things with his administration this time than last. A lot of the blue-pilled libertarians feel like he totally lied and it's a complete letdown, and honestly feel like he lied about the appointment of a libertarian to the cabinet. While they may not love it, RFK Jr. is a lifetime member of the LP. He did join this year when he ran for the nomination of the party. So technically speaking, he is a libertarian in name. Maybe not. He doesn't check all the boxes for all the purist libertarians, and that's really the problem. Is it's a purity test, and he does not pass. But the fact that he is having influence over the Trump administration, and Jay Bhattacharya is in at this position, and obviously we have Doge happening and all the other things that we've already talked about. To me, what this appointment says is, even though Trump won't come out and admit that management of COVID and the lockdowns was a mistake, something that he didn't do well, this to me, and I think to others I've seen sounding off on this topic on X, is a tacit admission that was handled incorrectly, and we're going to get to the bottom of it. We're going to repair the agencies that went so astray in their authoritarian response to the pandemic. And I mean, I can only hope that there are going to be more appointments like this going forward. And I don't know exactly all the agencies we have left to kind of get appointments for, but you can very clearly see RFK Jr.'s influence within the health component of the administration taking shape here. And like, I'm just freaking thrilled about this one.
It's symbolic, but it's also the potential gains are huge. For example, if you remember, we covered this when it got released. The leaked documents about funding of the Wuhan lab using coronaviruses, specifically through EcoHealth Alliance, was through the NIH, right? So all the receipts should be there. And if we have somebody who is, willing to crack that open and reveal the degree to which these efforts to create immunity by working ahead of nature's curve are actually, one of the primary causes of the release of COVID-19. That's a huge win as far as transparency and all that. And this guy has all the right incentives to be skeptical of that and and hopefully change the direction of, and what I would really look forward to is a change in the directive of how we do emergency response in our country, to return to the classical model, which is focused on protecting the vulnerable, not locking down the economy in some Chinese, communist approach to how to handle a health emergency. That kind of core work is done on the administrative level and can be changed just by the director changing the direction of the institution. And he has all the reasons to care about that and to want a different direction.
He probably it's probably also an area where Doge comes in as well, where comes in kind of and aligns in there, and it starts cleaning things up within the like in an advisory role too. So we probably end up seeing that being mixed into, because like that's kind of how I'm envisioning Doge. Is that it's kind of like you put all these like good people at the agency heads, and then you have Doge come in and just be like, here's what we found. Yeah. Right, and then it reports.
And also, because you have the Elon microphone and the Vivek microphone,
exactly,
you can then go directly to the public with those findings and hopefully get attention to it. So you create the political will to change it.
Yeah.
Joe, you had something there.
Yeah, well, I just think an additional potential positive outcome here is reforming the way that science is done and is funded, and sort of removing a lot of the overt politicization of the scientific community, right? I mean, like, we know that organizations like the NIH and the CDC and NIAID and all these like health administrations within the government fund the vast majority of scientific studies in the United States. And if those agencies are politicized, then the scientists that are applying for grant funding or for funding for their labs and such or studies are going to cater to the political whims of the people who are giving them the money. Because if you say something or discover something that is contrary to the political narrative, you're not going to get money for your next study. Right. So I'm hoping that by having somebody in here who is like less, within the political scientific orthodoxy, we might actually be able to change the way that science is done and actually get back to like real questioning of, the narratives and doing studies that actually come up with findings that aren't just reinforcing the consensus narrative in science. So like I'm pretty excited about that as well.
Yeah, it's pretty. I mean,
white pills, man.
Well,
dropping white pills.
White pills, baby.
Well, it's just this thing. Everybody complaining about like the administration's not libertarian enough. Like, if I was Trump, I would just make it less libertarian to spite these people. Like, 'cause they're awful.
But I understand where people are coming from when they're worried about Marco Rubio being at the table to negotiate the end of the war with Russia. Mm-hmm. Right? I get that. That said, Marco Rubio he's a hired gun. He's not going to ideological either way. I don't think if he's going to go whatever way Trump tells him to, because that guy's interested in power and prestige. And so these sorts of things, you have to keep it in terms of where we have limited reach, limited power, but we are making a difference. And this is a huge moment. And if you don't celebrate your wins, you will ruin your own momentum. We have momentum right now. It doesn't mean you can't criticize. You should feel welcome to criticize and highlight the areas you don't like. But good God, man, at least take the win when you have it, because you got to celebrate something. Otherwise, no one wants to be part of the group that never wins and never celebrates when they do.
And there's so many wins.
Yeah.
Assuming there's still Senate confirmations that have to be had and all this
and
stuff. But it just shows such a different culture shift. And it's something that we've never had in the presidency in any of our lifetimes right now, as we're moving towards it right now. Like, it's just like all the grievances, most of the grievances are being answered. Mm-hmm. Like, that's...
And you got to win in that. So take it when you have it. All right.
Absolutely.
That's the end message, right?
That's it. There's a lot to be grateful for this Thanksgiving, and you know what? We're grateful for you for sharing it with us and for being here. If you want to celebrate these wins with us, join the Discord. It's a great community. We've got some great folks in there. Shout out to all the Discord members and all of our supporting members in the skiff. The link for the Discord is below, and of course, if you'd like to become a paying member and get our access to our exclusive content, go to humanreactionpod.com. For now, we're going to sign off on the public episode and go to the skiff and have another conversation. We appreciate you very much. Happy Thanksgiving, and we will see you next time. Peace. Thanks for tuning in to Human Reaction. Please be sure to like, follow, subscribe, and give us a review on your podcast platform of choice. And if you want to become a member and support the show financially, check out humanreactionpod.com.